After I released my Persona review, Skag Cowboy accused me of viewing a non-traditional film through a traditional lens. While I admit that more of my favorite movies follow a traditional style than not, I don't generally register movies as traditional or non-traditional. They're just movies, and I don't believe that I'm treating these certain Arthouse movies unfairly with the method I use to discuss them. Need I remind you that there are plenty of movies with unconventional narratives that I enjoy. I love Avalon, Solaris, The Fountain, The Tree of Life, and The Seventh Seal, and I like and love, respectively, the David Lynch movies Eraserhead and Lost Highway, which are both very surreal, unorthodox movies. Also, 2001: A Space Odyssey is one of my all-time favorite movies, though I don't think it's quite as unconventional as many people think, as it exhibits a clear three-act narrative. But in the case of El Topo, Persona, Rage, Nine Songs, Sleeping Beauty, Antichrist, Mulholland Drive, Inland Empire, Blue Velvet, and others, I dislike these non-traditional movies. I think these are bad movies, but they're not bad because they're non-traditional, they're bad because they're bad. They're bad because they're tedious, dull, unfocused, disjointed, unconvincing, or a myriad of other reasons. My friend Greg told me that he still doesn't know exactly how I watch films. I'd have a hard time answering that myself, but there are a few criteria that I look for in the movies I watch, just like anyone else does. There are hundreds of film genres and dozens of styles of film criticism, but since film criticism is very subjective, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a non-traditional film to be engaging through at least one of these things: clever dialogue, convincing performances, interesting characters, a plot with tension, payoff, and some level of consistency and logic, even if it only makes sense on its own terms, a pace that keeps you interested, whether it be fast or slow, and, most importantly for me, the capacity to make me think it's real, and not contrived and staged. At the risk of sounding like confused Matthew, these are some of the things that I generally think good movies should have. A non-traditional film can be extremely weird, surreal, and unconventional while still having these features. Of course, a film's primary purpose is not necessarily to tell a story. Along with my claim of being nothing more than a subjective critic, this opinion is one big difference between me and confused Matthew. I can totally get on board with an avant-garde movie if it offers an engaging experience. I liked Eraserhead and Un Chien Andalou, remember? But if a film offers neither a good story or a compelling experience, because of, again, bad performances and corny contrived dialogue, lack of tension, plodding uneventful pacing, and/or a general feeling of fakeness, then I won't view it favorably. I really don't mean to impose rules on creativity. As a writer myself, I would find that unconscionable. But the audience's interpretation is just as important as the author's intent, and I am simply setting down some standards that I believe most movies are capable of, traditional or non-traditional, by virtue of being films, and stating that their absence or bad execution will usually result in bad movies, traditional or non-traditional. This system is built from a lifetime of film-going experience, as the films I like have these qualities, and the films I don't like don't have these qualities. In the good Arthouse movies I mentioned earlier, the acting and dialogue are solid or as good as they need to be, and they all have dramatic tension, good character development, effective pacing, and an ongoing, consistent focus. In Avalon, Solaris, The Seventh Seal, and 2001, the pacing is slow but riveting. 2001's three-act plot engages with themes of artificial intelligence, technology, and evolution. Hal develops from a mild, cordial colleague to a paranoid, driven being with a genuine fear for his own existence, and the tension comes from both Hal's machinations and anticipation about how humankind will progress next. The Tree of Life, for all its flaws, does a brilliant job of paralleling a suburban family with the history of life on Earth, and investigates how the so-called way of nature is inevitably doomed to failure, and the patriarch of the family develops from a domineering bully to a regretful man with very little left. The Fountain engages with themes of life, death, and reincarnation, as the various incarnations of Tom gradually come to accept death. Solaris tells an outer space romance against the backdrop of an unfathomable alien intelligence, as Kelvin progresses from shocked rejection to a protective love for her dead wife Hari's doppelganger. Hari develops too, as she is soon shattered by the realization that she is not in fact real. The Seventh Seal has obvious themes of death, inhumanity, and compassion told through the knight Antonius's chess game with death and his journey with a family of friendly travelers. The tension in this film is generated by Antonius's deep existential need for proof of God and the inescapable specter of death, and Antonius finds fulfillment and completeness in his warm bond with the family and saving them from death's clutches, even as proof of God still eludes him. In Avalon, the lone player Ash has the dramatic goal of reaching the rumored Class SA of her virtual reality game, and must begrudgingly join a team again in order to achieve this goal, despite a traumatic experience she had as a team member in the past. Therefore, Ash has ambition and some depth, and the film creates a fascinating world for you to ponder, as you are increasingly uncertain about whether any level of Ash's world is real. Finally, Lost Highway has very good acting and dialogue, after the first third, a steady pace, and a dark, intriguing narrative. Of course, these films are, to varying degrees, more concerned with compelling experiences than narrative, not to downplay the quality of their narratives, mind you, and Eraserhead appears to be a pretty big exception to my system. However, it's actually not. As I explained in my review, the acting is very good, and Lynch crafts a complete, strangely cohesive world out of surrealism, meaning that it makes sense within itself. Eraserhead has hardly any good dialogue or character development, but it's not supposed to, and that's fine. I always try to analyze and appreciate films on their own terms. As for Persona, Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet, Inland Empire, El Topo, Sleeping Beauty, Antichrist, and those other Arthouse movies I don't like, I believe that they obviously tried to provide a good narrative, decent character development, functional dialogue, a world that makes sense in some way, narrative tension, and so on, and yet, in my opinion, failed. Some of them utterly. Ultimately, I try to analyze the films I watch on their own terms, but I also judge them against a set of standards that I look for in good movies. These standards are, of course, good acting and dialogue, interesting character development, an engaging narrative with tension and some level of direction and logic, pacing that holds your attention, and a feeling of verisimilitude. I don't think it's unfair to judge traditional and non-traditional movies by these standards, as these are qualities that most movies of any type, in my experience, tend to share. I'm sure it's possible for a film to be good with none of these qualities, but I guess I'll find out when I review Begotten. Anyway, I'm sure you'll agree that when these traits are attempted and executed poorly, the result is usually a bad movie, and this applies to mainstream and arthouse movies. I am not, in my opinion, viewing non-traditional movies through a traditional lens. I am analyzing both movies through a shared lens that fits them both. Thanks for watching. Cheers.